For most people in Europe, wars feel distant. They happen somewhere else, on maps, on the news, in political discussions. But wars rarely stay far away for long. Even when the fighting happens thousands of kilometers away, the economic effects slowly travel across borders and eventually reach everyday European life. The truth is simple. Wars are not only military events, they are economic shocks. Every major conflict affects energy markets, supply chains, government budgets, and global trade. And Europe, because of its strong connection to global markets, often feels these economic changes very quickly. To understand the economic impact of wars, we should start with energy. Europe imports a large share of its oil and gas. When conflicts disrupt supply routes or create uncertainty in energy markets, prices rarely increase slowly. Instead, they jump rapidly. And those price increases spread through the entire economy. When energy becomes more expensive, the effect spreads quickly through the economy. Factories need electricity, transportation companies need fuel, farmers depend on energy to produce food. So when oil or gas prices rise because of global conflicts, the increase does not stay in the energy market. It moves through every layer of the economy. This chain reaction is how wars often lead to inflation. Energy prices rise first, then production costs increase, transportation becomes more expensive, and eventually those costs appear in the final price consumers pay. By the time people notice inflation in stores, the economic shock has already traveled through the entire system. But energy prices are only the first layer of the story. Wars also disrupt global supply chains. Factories stop production. Shipping routes become unstable. Insurance costs increase, and companies begin to rethink where they manufacture and transport their products. These changes slowly reshape entire industries. For Europe, this is particularly important. European economies depend strongly on international trade. Cars, machinery, electronics, industrial equipment. When global supply chains slow down, European factories cannot produce as efficiently as before. And when production slows, economic growth slows as well. Another effect of wars appears inside government budgets. When conflicts increase global tensions, countries invest more money in defense, military equipment, security systems, strategic reserves. These investments are often necessary, but they also increase public spending and change national financial priorities. When governments increase defense spending, the money has to come from somewhere. Sometimes countries borrow more money, sometimes they increase taxes, and sometimes they simply move funding away from other areas like infrastructure, healthcare, or education. These financial trade-offs may not appear immediately, but they can shape economic priorities for years. Another economic effect of wars appears in financial markets. Investors dislike uncertainty. When geopolitical risks increase, companies delay investments and markets become more volatile. Stock prices fluctuate more, business expansion slows, and companies become more cautious about hiring and long-term projects. This uncertainty often changes business behavior. Companies become more conservative, they delay expansion plans, they reduce hiring, and they focus more on protecting existing operations instead of taking risks. For employees, this can mean fewer job opportunities and slower salary growth. For ordinary households, these macroeconomic changes appear in small everyday details. Energy bills increase, food becomes more expensive, interest rates rise, and financial planning becomes more difficult. People may not always connect these changes to global conflicts, but the economic link is often direct. One of the clearest examples of how wars affect Europe can be seen in energy bills. When global energy markets become unstable, electricity and heating costs rise quickly. For many households, this is not a small change. Energy is a basic necessity, and when those costs increase, families must adjust the rest of their budgets. When household expenses increase, consumer behavior begins to change. Families spend less on discretionary purchases. Restaurants receive fewer visitors. Retail sales slow down. Small economic adjustments spread through the economy, gradually affecting businesses that depend on consumer spending. Over time, these changes affect the broader economy. Businesses reduce investment. hiring slows down, and economic growth becomes weaker. Wars rarely affect economies through a single dramatic moment. Instead, they slowly reshape financial conditions across entire regions. Another important factor is uncertainty. Wars create unpredictable economic conditions. Businesses cannot easily forecast future costs, regulations, or market demand. When uncertainty rises, companies delay decisions. And delayed decisions slow economic momentum. Financial markets react quickly to this uncertainty. Investors move money into safer assets. Currencies fluctuate. Interest rates may rise. These financial adjustments can influence mortgages, loans, and investment returns across Europe. For many Europeans, the most visible change appears in housing markets. Interest rates influence mortgage payments. When financial uncertainty rises, borrowing often becomes more expensive, and higher borrowing costs make buying homes or investing in property more difficult. Beyond energy and inflation, wars also reshape government priorities. When security risks increase, countries expand defense budgets, new military equipment, strategic reserves, defense infrastructure. These investments may strengthen national security, but they also redirect significant financial resources inside national economies. When government spending grows quickly, countries must balance their budgets. Some governments increase borrowing, others introduce new taxes, and sometimes spending is redirected away from other areas like infrastructure, healthcare, or education. These financial decisions influence economic development for years. Another long-term effect appears in public debt. Large geopolitical tensions often push governments to spend more quickly than they collect in taxes. Borrowing fills that gap. Over time, higher public debt can influence future economic policies, interest rates, and government spending priorities. These economic pressures often appear slowly. There is rarely a single moment when everything changes. Instead, households notice small adjustments. Energy bills increase, taxes rise, mortgages become more expensive. One by one, these changes reshape financial stability for ordinary families. Economic uncertainty also influences business confidence. When companies cannot predict future costs, regulations, or energy prices, they become cautious. They delay investments, they slow expansion plans, and they focus on maintaining stability instead of pursuing rapid growth. For workers, these changes appear in employment conditions. Hiring slows, salary growth becomes more moderate, and job markets become more competitive. Even if wars happen far away, the economic ripple effects eventually influence opportunities inside European labor markets. To understand the real impact of these changes, imagine a typical European household. Stable job, mortgage payments, monthly utilities, groceries, transportation. Most families build their financial plans around predictable costs and stable income. But when global economic shocks appear, even small increases in expenses can slowly disrupt that balance. Now imagine energy prices increasing significantly. Electricity, heating, fuel. Each of these costs may rise gradually, but together they create pressure on the entire household budget. Families must reduce spending elsewhere or delay financial goals. Small price increases can slowly reshape financial priorities. Food prices can also respond to global disruptions. Agricultural production depends on energy, fertilizers, and transportation. When any of these systems becomes unstable, food supply becomes more expensive. Consumers often notice this effect directly in grocery stores. Housing markets can also feel these pressures. When inflation rises and interest rates increase, mortgages become more expensive. Higher borrowing costs make it harder for families to buy homes or refinance existing loans. Financial decisions that once seemed manageable may suddenly become more difficult. Over time, these economic pressures influence personal financial decisions. Families delay purchases, businesses postpone investments, and individuals become more cautious about long-term commitments. Economic uncertainty spreads quietly through everyday financial planning. All of these effects illustrate a simple reality. Wars rarely affect daily life instantly. Instead, they change economic conditions step by step. Energy, trade, government budgets, financial markets, and eventually, the everyday expenses of ordinary people. When economists analyze the long-term impact of wars, they rarely focus on a single event. Instead, they examine the chain reactions that follow. Energy markets shift, trade routes adjust, government budgets expand, and financial conditions slowly change across entire regions. These changes rarely appear dramatic, but they accumulate over time. For Europe, these adjustments often appear in the cost of stability. Energy independence, strategic reserves, military readiness, infrastructure protection. These investments can strengthen resilience, but they also increase financial pressure on governments and taxpayers. Economic resilience often requires preparation. Countries invest in supply chains, energy diversification, strategic partnerships. These adjustments reduce risk over time, but they also require years of investment and planning. At the same time, households continue adapting. Families adjust budgets, businesses revise strategies, governments redesign policies. Economic systems rarely remain static during periods of global tension. This constant adaptation is part of how modern economies respond to geopolitical pressure. Markets adjust, policies evolve, and financial systems attempt to maintain stability despite global uncertainty. For individuals, understanding these connections is important. Global conflicts may feel distant, but economic systems are interconnected, and changes in one region can slowly influence financial conditions elsewhere. Understanding economic cause and effect helps people interpret these changes more clearly. Rising prices, policy shifts, market volatility. These are rarely random events. They are usually connected to broader global dynamics. Economic awareness allows individuals to plan more carefully. Diversified investments, flexible financial strategies, long-term thinking. These approaches can help households remain stable even when global conditions change. Wars will always shape global economics in some way, but understanding these patterns can make their effects easier to navigate, because awareness often reduces uncertainty, and better decisions begin with clearer information. Wars may begin far away, but their economic consequences rarely stay there. They travel through energy markets, supply chains, and government policies, and eventually they appear in everyday life, sometimes in places people least expect.